So yeah, nice to be with everyone this morning. It does feel like spring. It is insane, this weather. It is up and down, up and down. But anyways, I'll take this day for what it's worth. So a great day to talk about how to be a better leader with positive psychology. And that's exactly what we're going to do in this session. So a couple of things that I want to cover. Really want to dive into what is meant by a thriving workplace culture, right? So what are those things in our workplaces that contribute to more positivity and resilience, ingredients of a thriving workplace culture, and what are some things that frustrate that? One of the tools that I look to understand how do we better invest in those things that contribute to a thriving workplace culture is positive psychology. So we'll talk about what that is and some best practices coming out of positive psychology research that help to build more resilience in individuals, but also how do we apply that more broadly across teams at work. And then finally, I always like to leave people with really easy to implement ideas that you can take back and execute at work right away. So as we go through this, I have some places where I'll be asking for feedback and input via chat. I'll also pause for questions as we go, but feel free to throw your questions in chat along the way, and I'll make sure to monitor those throughout and certainly at the end. A little bit about me. Zach shared a little bit about my bio, but I want to share the reason why I got into this work around positive mindset and resilience, specifically at work. And I really do view resilience as very much a leadership competency and treat it as such with the leaders and the companies that I consult with. But my journey to this really started about 8 years ago or so. I was an executive for a large Fortune 100 company. And I always felt like I walked around every day with just sort of a fair amount of burnout, right? Not to the point where I couldn't show up every day and do my job, but I always felt just sort of work was super heavy on my shoulders. I think I'm wired as that type of person who I always feel like I'm one mistake away from being fired. Work is on my mind a lot, even if I'm not physically at work. And I knew that because of that, I wasn't showing up at home with my family the way that I really wanted to be. I was exhausted at the end of my workday and often maybe more irritable at home. And I knew this about me. I knew that there was a fair degree of burnout in there, but I also knew that, hey, work is what it is. It's a demanding job. I put a lot of pressure on myself. So that's just life. I really didn't think that there could be another way of coping with this. Well, at the company, I happened to be friends with, and I knew the guy who is basically the chauffeur for the company's past 3 CEOs, would drive them back and forth to their meetings and to the airport. And I happened to see him in the hallway, and I just asked him more out of a joke. It's like, hey, I know that you got to know the past 3 CEOs really super well, but you're always with them in those quiet moments. It's just you and the person in the car. Just curious to know, have you ever seen them totally lose it? Have they ever, a meeting gone wrong or a bad phone call and they just like lost it? Or have they ever like broken down and just started like crying like a baby in the back of the car? Kind of asking because I felt like sometimes I feel like doing that. I'd like to know that the CEO might feel that way as well. So his reaction was kind of interesting. And he said, no, I've never seen that. But what's interesting about the 3 CEOs that he's gotten to know, they're all extremely different in terms of personality and sort of their leadership style and approach, except for one thing. They all seem to have this ability to just not dwell when things go bad, but to move forward. And he goes, and trust me, I know when things don't go well, but they don't dwell on it. They seem to move forward. And that's the only thing that I can point to that's common about them. And that really made me think, so if resilience, is an important part of their job, maybe part of, being a CEO or a senior leader isn't necessarily that you're the smartest person in the room, isn't necessarily that you're the most charismatic. Maybe it just means you're the last person standing. And I really started to see resilience as a leadership competency a skill that I hadn't really focused on as a leadership competency, and I felt like it was missing in my leadership toolkit. I've taken over 30 years of working in corporate, every single leadership course you can think of, from effective communication to business savvy. I have an MBA. Resilience was never addressed as a topic, as a competency, and I really felt like it should be. So that's what really started this journey. So because I couldn't find a course that positioned resilience as a leadership competency, I went on my own independent learning journey, and I just interviewed leaders from all walks of life, within the company I worked, outside of the company that I worked, leaders of for-profits, nonprofits, startups, all different industries, people who I respected, who seemed to exude positivity, seemed to exude resilience, and just ask them, what are your skills? What are your techniques? How did you incorporate this in the way that you engage and interact with others? And I just learned from them. So I started doing all these interviews. It actually, the interviews were so interesting, I thought other people could learn from it, not just me. And that turned into a podcast series. And the podcast series was really the starting off point for me to leave and start my own consulting practice around this. These are pictures of some of the people that I've interviewed over the years. But what I really did was, at the start of the pandemic, really doubled down on my interviews. I started doing an interview once a week, because certainly leading through crisis is definitely a time when your resilient skills are called to task. And so a lot of interviews with leaders, just what's your relationship to resilience and positivity leading through crisis? And so a lot of the content and the tips and the best practices that I'm going to share with you today come from positive psychology research, but they also come from all the interviews and just the practical advice that I've gotten from so many people along the way. All right, so that's just a little bit of setup. All right, so why I think this topic is so important, and it's such a hot topic within companies these days, because there's really two trends that are happening. So before the pandemic, the World Health Organization put out a statistic that 79% of employees in the United States are experiencing some form of burnout. So I actually like to say burnout was the pandemic before the pandemic. Recent research, however, from Gallup shows that we're on not a good trajectory. So we already had pandemic present in the workplace, but what's happening now is, since pandemic, or in the current times that we're in, 72% of employees report that they are being more productive. So productivity at work has definitely gone up for a lot of reasons. Part of it is when we shifted to more remote work, it helped us to be more productive because things like we're not commuting, but also, changes that companies had to make because of the pandemic. Maybe the workforce has shrunk, and so people who remain are taking on more roles and responsibilities, taking on more work. We're working harder is the bottom line for a lot of different reasons. But at the same time, our well-being is decreasing pretty dramatically, even from the past year. So burnout is getting worse. The feeling that employees feeling like they're thriving and doing well personally is getting worse. So you've got two phenomenons headed in opposite direction that is not good, not sustainable. We can't work harder and then be less well. Not a recipe for success. That's why I think it's so important to think about individually, what can we do to invest in our well-being at work? Collectively, what can we do to invest in our well-being at work? So that's a little bit about the why, but what does burnout really lead to if it's unaddressed? It has a lot of physical detrimental implications for us. People who suffer from burnout at the individual level, more likely to take sick days, more likely to leave their current employer, emotional stress of not feeling confident in their jobs. So this is at the individual level, right? But if you multiply that times the 79% of employees who were feeling this way prior to the pandemic, and then the fact that the trend is not getting better, this actually adds up to a lot of lost revenue for companies. And I saw that in my previous employer, started paying more money in short-term disability claims that employees were taking specifically due to stress and anxiety. So it was really starting to hit the pocketbook just as one example. That's not the only measure of success or lack of success. But I think that's where companies start to wake up and realize, well, okay, we have to do something because it's the right thing to do, but also because it's the financially prudent thing to do. So what do we do, right? I was looking for answers, not just for myself, but also on behalf of the companies that I consult with and had worked for. Like, how do we start to transition and bring that, more alignment between being productive, but feeling well, and being productive out of a sense of thriving? And so I turned to positive psychology. If you're not familiar with positive psychology, it's the scientific study of what makes humans thrive. It's an aspect of psychology, and the research around this really took off in the mid 90s when the president of the American Psychology Association at the time said, to date, psychology has really been focused on why humans are broken, mental illness. And if we want to have a well-rounded view of psychology, we have to look at the other side. What makes us well, emotional and mental well-being, what makes humans thrive. So since then, there's been just a flurry of research on this topic. Many large universities have a positive psychology research unit. And so I look to what are we learning from that research to understand. If we can understand what makes individual humans thrive, maybe we can understand collectively when humans come together as a group at work, how can we make that group thrive? So a couple of things from the positive psychology research that I want to lay as a foundation for some of these best practices that you can apply as leaders at work. So the first is to recognize that all humans have what's called a negativity bias. That just means that we are conditioned to put more emphasis, put more import on negative news, information, and events. We focus on that more. And to assume the worst, especially if we're confronted with something that's unfamiliar. The research tells us this, and I would just say anecdotally, maybe this is a question that you can throw in chat, right? So if you were given both a compliment and a criticism at the same time, write in chat if you would focus more on the compliment, or write in chat if you would focus more on the criticism. And let's see what people say. So compliment or criticism, if you were given both at the same time. Criticism, criticism. That's kind of the trend. We'll keep it going, just the criticism. Yes. So that's just sort of how humans are wired. Every once in a while, someone will say a compliment. And I was like, you need to be teaching this course, not me. But it's just human nature, right? We just, we just tend to focus on the negative. It's how we're wired. And the reason for that is early in the days of human development, assuming the worst was quite productive and functional. We were confronted with many things during our day that absolutely could kill us, being confronted with a saber-toothed tiger, for example. And so that fight or flight instinct came in for self-preservation. And those who survived passed this gene on. So now the question is, all right, in modern society, things that happen to us on a day-to-day basis, while they may be unpleasant, like a criticism, they are certainly not going to kill us. So why do we maintain that negativity bias? And it's important to remember that negative emotions in and of themselves, while they are not pleasant, they are functional. So we would not be the humans that we are. We would not grow and develop as humans if we had no negative emotions. I think that's really important to learn when we talk about resilience and positivity. The goal is to not avoid negative feelings, right? Negative feelings actually do play a role. So when we feel sad, it tends to help us be more connected to the people that we love in our lives. Fear, for example, does play a role. It helps to keep us safe, or at a minimum motivates us, right? When we feel guilt, it causes us to reflect on maybe our negative behaviors and what can we do going forward so we don't have to feel that uncomfortable feeling of guilt. So it's important to recognize that negative emotions play a role. It is how we're wired. We would not be human if we didn't have negative emotions. But the key with understanding how do we thrive, how to be more resilient, is to extract the lessons learned from those negative emotions, but then move forward and to not let our negativity bias hijack us so that we only think the worst. We only focus on the negative, that we're actually not able to understand and learn from the lesson learned from those negative emotions, as uncomfortable as they are, to move forward so that we can be better as humans. So this is my definition of resilience. This is not what you'll find in Webster's or anything like this. This is my definition, sort of piecing together what I'm learning from positive psychology and what I'm learning from people who seem to be more resilient leaders than not. So resilience, my definition, is the ability to acknowledge, experience, and work through adversity and negative emotions in order to learn and emerge stronger on the other side. But to be able to do that with grace, and again, to be able to kind of like shorten the time period that you can get to better. And not, like I said, allow our negativity bias, which is always present with us, to just hijack us, and we wallow and we stew unnecessarily long with our negative emotions. So I hope that that definition is clear and makes sense. So we're going to build from there. So if resilience is the ability to learn from negative emotions, come out on the other side with more grace, with maybe a little bit more speed, but wiser and smarter, what leads to that? What are those competencies or those ingredients that help us do that? So positive psychology research also broke down what leads to a positive mindset. And there's really three components. Roughly speaking, I've sort of broken them out so you have relatively the influence that they have on positivity. So the least influential thing on our positive mindset, the ability to be resilient, is external things happening around us. I was surprised by that from the research. I just assumed when bad things happen around us, of course, that's a major factor why we feel bad. The research again shows that the things that happen to us externally is a really small factor in all of this. The only way I could start to rationalize it was to think, well, okay, I think we all know people who have a lot of really bad things happen to them in life. They've had very difficult lives. A lot of traumatic things happen to them. My best friend would be an example of that. For some reason, she's always positive, always hopeful, like always looking ahead to the future. So again, an example of even when negative things happen around you, like we have the choice to either think positive or think negative. Then we all know examples of people that they seemingly have everything in life: wonderful job, wonderful family, their health, and they're grumpy and irritable and they do nothing but complain. So that's kind of like how my brain understands the research. The biggest category in terms of our ability to shift from negativity to positivity is just our DNA, how we're wired. I don't know, some of us are just more half glass empty type of people, some are half glass full type of people. It sort of is what it is. But the exciting thing about the research and the hopeful thing, the positive thing, is that roughly, let's just say 40% of our ability to move from negativity, to minimize the grip that our negativity bias has on us, is through practice, by practicing more positive thoughts and behaviors. And the best way that I can sort of explain the research is start to think about your brain as any other muscle in your body. If you want to have strong toned arms, you have to lift weights consistently, right? If you want a more positive, more resilient mindset, you have to practice positive thoughts and behaviors somewhat consistently to build up that positivity muscle memory so that when you need it, when you're confronted with things, when those negative emotions grip you, as they always will, you have that positivity muscle memory from practice that can help you move with more grace from the negative to the positive. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. That's what I learned from the research. And then the research also gives you tons of, they call them, I forget what they call them, it's like a clinical term for basically best practices. All these things that you can do that fall in that category of positive thoughts and behaviors to practice, to condition your brain to be more positive. I boiled all of them down to basically 3 categories, and I call them happy habits. So if we can do more things consistently that fall within mindfulness, having an attitude of gratitude, and investing in experiences and relationships, we are investing in our positivity. And we are, I think, developing that muscle as a leadership competency for when we show up for work, when we need it for work. So I'm gonna, in this next section, just pivot to explaining super briefly what each of these categories is, some examples, hear from you, your own examples so we can learn from each other, and then talk about how these play out for you individually as a leader, but then as a leader showing up at work and wanting to create a more positive, thriving workplace culture for your teams. So let's start first by, what do you all know about happy habits? I'm curious to know, we all have our own ways of moving from negative to positive, from reducing stress and anxiety, some of those negative emotions. What are your go-to stress reduction strategies? Let's just start there. Let's get sort of a laundry list of different things that people do. Go ahead and throw them in chat. When you know you need that positive mindset boost, when you have to invest in your own well-being, what are those things that you do? What are your go-to stress reduction strategies? Maybe some people go running or do yoga. Okay, so we've got breathing exercises, listening to music, meditation, working out, music, a few deep breaths, running, disconnect, exercise. Venting. I like that one. Tell me more. Let's get a few more. Reframing the stress. Yeah, sort of rationalizing it, reflecting on it, thinking about it. All right, well, I love that we are sort of in tune with what works for us, but the thing is, you may not know why it works. And this is, again, why I'll reference the positive psychology research. I think sometimes knowing why something works maybe gives us more confidence to do those things, knowing that they actually do work. So I want to break down a little bit of like why those go-to stress reduction strategies that you all mentioned, why they work, and what the positive psychology research is telling us about why they work and why we're naturally gravitated towards them, even if we don't know why. So let's start first with mindfulness. So mindfulness is all about just turning your thoughts to the present moment, right? The reason why being more present in the moment helps to reduce stress and anxiety is one of those intentional thoughts and behaviors that helps you move from the grips of your negativity bias to the other side, is because the biggest source of stress and anxiety for humans is ruminating about a past that we cannot change, or worrying about a future that hasn't happened yet. So when we can at least be present in the moment, right? In the moment, we feel that there is a sense of control because we are in the moment. We're not worrying about extra things that are at this point out of our control, the past and the future. And so that helps to naturally sort of limit our negative emotions around that. And so some of the things that you all mentioned are mindfulness practices. A lot of times people think meditation is mindfulness. That's one form of mindfulness. But there's also mindful movement. And it's really sort of anything that you're doing that sort of you get in the zone, you lose yourself in. So a lot of people mention exercise. That would be an example. Listening to music, that would be an example. It just brings you into, and you're more focused on what's happening at the moment. A lot of people mention things like gardening or coloring, working with their hands. A lot of people also mention doing chores. I would fall in that category. When I'm feeling a little stressed out, There's nothing like unloading the dishwasher, partly because I feel like I'm accomplishing something, but I'm also just like focused on unloading the dishwasher or vacuuming. So I think sometimes we're drawn to things where we can lose ourselves in, we can stop for a minute worrying about the past or worrying about the future, just really focusing on what we're doing at the moment. So part of the reasons why we may naturally gravitate to those activities is because the research shows just giving our brains a reprieve a little bit in the moment naturally is one of those things that helps us to practice and build that positive muscle memory. All right, so that's why mindfulness is an important technique. Having an attitude of gratitude is being aware of and thankful for the good things in life, also expressing appreciation and kindness towards others. I call this the buy one, get one free happy habit, because when we express appreciation towards others, it helps us feel the sense of gratitude, but it also extends gratitude to someone else. And the reason why having an attitude of gratitude helps to minimize our negativity bias is because really, if when we just fill our heads with more positive thoughts, we don't have room for negative thoughts. There is a much more scientific way of explaining that, but that's my layman's person way of explaining it. So a lot of times, I don't think anyone sort of really mentions specifically gratitude as their go-to stress reduction strategy. Sometimes it's kind of hard to channel gratitude, especially when we're feeling down. But one trick would be to go to your thin place. And I don't know if anyone's heard that term before. So my positive psychology coach, the person who helped me get my certification, told me about the thin place. And she asked me one day, she said, Beth, where is your thin place? And I didn't know what she meant. And I thought she meant a place where everyone is skinny. So I said, Miami. And she said, no, that's not what I mean. Basically, your thin place is that place that's so beautiful. It's like the thin place between heaven and earth. And then I thought, oh, well, that's easy. Here's my thin place. So I live somewhat close to Lake Michigan. There's this tiny little slice of it called Bay Beach near my house, and it's just beautiful. So this is a picture from just a couple of days ago. It doesn't matter if it's, cloudy or rainy, snowy, foggy. It's just gorgeous. And you can't help but be overwhelmed with appreciation for the good things in life, even on a bad day. So I try to get here as often as I can to see the sunrise, just to kind of like start my morning with an attitude of gratitude. So the research shows that there is something about nature. There is just something about nature that prompts that feeling of gratitude. So if you're really struggling to channel and practice gratitude as one of those happy habits, try to find where your thin place is. All right, so this is my thin place. And so what I want you to do is in chat, think about where is your thin place? Where is some place that you go to and you know that it is a place that inspires that sense of gratitude, just that appreciation for the good things in life and others. Please throw in chat when you reflect on where is your thin place. A lot of times water and mountains are big ones. Nobody? No thin places to share? Yeah, in Colorado, I bet you've got a ton of thin places. So yeah, on top of the ski hill, and you get off the lift, ready to head down, beautiful view. Absolutely. Yeah, there's just something about nature. Now, you may not be able to get to your thin place often, but I think it's even if you can get there, maybe transport yourself via your imagination and emotionally. I feel like my bed. Yes. No, it almost doesn't matter. But again, it's that place that it just sparks the feeling of gratitude. Another woman said it was her car. She had 5 kids at home. And she said that's the place where she goes to get solitude. So just reflect on your thin place. The point being, find something that helps to inspire a sense of gratitude, because the more you practice gratitude, you're building that positivity muscle memory so that you don't get hijacked by your negativity bias. All right, so the last one, the last happy habit, investing in experiences and relationships. So the research shows that when we invest in experiences and time with people, more so than material things, we have much more lasting and deeper, meaningful joy in life. And a sense of belonging with others is the number one contributor to joy and meaning in life. So just to make sure that we're always investing in those things. So those are again, what the research says. If we want to build our positivity muscle memory to move more gracefully and more quickly from negative emotions to positive emotions, practicing these things, doing them consistently helps to increase our own resilience and well-being as individuals. And I think one of the best things that you can do as a leader is to show up as your best self at work. And that pays dividends in terms of the influence that you have on the culture, because leaders really set the tone. So the first thing of being a better leader with positive psychology is to actually invest in your own well-being. And so probably up until now, you're thinking, yeah, I get it. I would do all those things if I had all the time in the world. I don't do those things because I don't have all the time in the world. I've got a job, I've got kids, I've got responsibilities. And yeah, so what I've learned from all the leaders that I interviewed is that nothing is going to change unless you invest in the time. And what the research shows is that intentional practicing of these happy habits in some way, shape, or form, even just 10 minutes a day, goes a long way to strengthen resilience as a leadership competency. So my question to the leaders is, and all of them, by the way, were quite intentional about investing in their own self-care. And so my question to them is, how do you do it with the demands of the job that you have? And so here's some tips that I got for them. How do you invest in your self-care, even if it's 10 minutes a day, more consistently than that? Again, remember, brain, like any other muscle in your body, if you want strong arms, for example, you got to lift weights consistently, not lift weights, go to the gym and lift all the weights once a year, not helpful. Small weights consistently, helpful. So one of the hacks from the interviews is to schedule the time. So psychologically, if it's on the calendar, you're going to protect that time a little bit more. We tend to schedule things that are super important to us for our physical health, dentist, doctor appointments. For some reason, our emotional well-being, we don't put it in that same category. Start to schedule it. A lot of you said you do exercising. Maybe schedule it so that you actually get to the gym or go running. But if you are one of the people who listen to music, schedule it. If it's on your calendar, you're more likely to protect the time. So that was one hack. The other one is to integrate some of these things into micro moments. And this is really good, especially for, I would say, an attitude of gratitude, practicing thoughts around appreciation. Micro moments are small little things that you do during the day that you have to do anyway, they're kind of mindless, that you can do other things to invest in your happy habits. A simple example would be brushing your teeth. I brush my teeth twice a day. Yay. And so, wow, that's what, 5-8 minutes or so each time. I've been challenging myself while I'm doing that anyway, I'm not doing anything else, to maybe reflect on one thing that went well that day, right? And practice thinking about the good rather than reflecting on everything that didn't go well or everything that I got to do tomorrow. Maybe reflecting on who are those people that have been instrumental in my life in terms of supporters, mentors, and just reflecting on, gosh, how lucky I am to have so many people. So that's just an example of how you use micro moments. Another example, and just on a personal side, when my kids were younger, I really wanted to instill with them resilience as a leadership competency at a very early age. So I'm driving them around to all their activities, and I would just play a game. Every time we saw a red car, for example, we had to share one thing that we were grateful for, either a person in our life or an experience or something like that. So that's how you sort of just integrate this into micro moments. Maybe when you're waiting in line or you're put on hold, use that as a prompt to either pause, be mindful and breathe, or tap into gratitude. Third hack, people said that they used natural transitions as prompts. I thought that was super interesting. So a natural transition would be, somebody said every time they turn a handle to enter a room, they will take, 10 seconds of conscious breathing just to be sort of present in the moment, right? I'm entering this room, especially if you're entering a room to go to a meeting, right? How are you setting your intention? Being present in the moment, not worrying about the meeting you came from, not worrying about the next meeting you have to go to, but it's that transition of crossing the threshold. I started doing that as an example, the transition whenever I park the car before I get out. A lot of times I'm a little stressed out, getting through traffic, getting to where I needed to be. Again, pause, take that mindful moment. But the transition just is a reminder so that I don't go through the day and I don't do it, right? And maybe I do that 3 times during the day. It kind of, 30 seconds here, 30 seconds there, that's a couple minutes. I'm getting closer to investing in my well-being in a meaningful way, according to the research, that will go a long way to increasing my resilience. Those are some hacks, but I will tell you the number one hack across the board. The number one hack across the board was not feeling guilty. I think the biggest reason why we put ourselves and our well-being last is we just feel like it's a luxury. I don't have time for this. Don't have time to listen to music. But again, I think when we reframe resilience and positivity as a leadership competency, then maybe we don't feel so guilty about it, right? So if I were to tell my boss, hey, I'm taking 10 minutes to read an article or watch an online course about more effective communication skills, they'd be like, oh, that's a good use of your time at work. But if I said, hey, I'm taking 10 minutes to go on a walk, I don't know. But I think if we make sure that we don't feel guilty and we're doing ourselves good in the long term so that we can be better leaders, and we all need to be better leaders because of the stats that I started out with, we're not on a good trajectory here. So I think as leaders, again, you set the tone for others. If you don't indicate to others that investing in your well-being, your resilience, your positivity isn't important, it will not be important for anyone else. So when you do these things, I think it's important to share and to talk about it. So all your stress reduction strategies that you mentioned, let people know, right? When you show up for a meeting, maybe you want to say, hey, I had a chance to go running this morning and it really benefited me. Talk about what you're doing so that people know you take well-being seriously for yourself. And then that signals that it's okay for others to do the same. Yeah. Okay. Well, so those were some tips that I heard, that I picked up, those hacks, right? But maybe some of you have some better ideas. So does anyone have other strategies for prioritizing your own self-care so you can invest in strengthening your resilience? Does anybody else have any other tips or strategies for how to not let the day go by and not doing any of this that you want to share with others? If so, please throw in chat. Okay, I will look back at chat to see if there are any ideas worth sharing, but please, 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 we can all learn from each other. So, well, okay. So, oh, I have a hand raised. Okay, Sharon, I don't know how to, can you just talk? Oh, maybe you put it in chat. Let's just see. Oh, I don't know. Well, anyways, Sharon, don't know if you had a comment or a question, but we will pause at the end to accommodate. All right, so I said, how do you be a better leader with positive psychology? The first of all is take it seriously for yourself, prioritize it for yourself, let others on your team know so that you're signaling to them that these are important things. But now let's move from the individual level to the team, the workplace level, right? How do we take some of these happy habits and apply them at scale at work. So, happy habits help the individual thrive. How do these happy habits come out at work to help the workplace culture thrive? And so there are a number of things that are in place in a workplace that lead to a thriving workplace culture. So a sense of connection with others. Again, meaningful relationships with others is the number one source of joy and meaning in life, in our personal lives, certainly also at work in our professional lives. So connection with others, if there's a workplace culture, a team where people feel connected to each other, that leads to a thriving environment. Certainly feeling appreciated for your contributions at work leads to a thriving workplace culture. Making sure that people feel connected to higher purpose and meaning so that our work doesn't become a series of meaningless tasks, but it adds up into something more meaningful. And feeling like we're always bettering ourselves, the opportunity to learn and grow. So those are really the 4 anchors of a thriving workplace culture. So hopefully you can see how some of these happy habits, if we can invest in them at work, they do lead to all of these things that are the underpinnings of a thriving workplace culture. So being more present in the moment, not overly focused on the past or the future, but having collectively, are we focused on the moment? Collectively, are we valuing and appreciating each other? Do we enter the day with an attitude of gratitude? And collectively, are we investing in our experiences, especially experiences that help us learn and grow, and our relationships, right? So if these positive psychology best practices can help us at the individual level, how do we bring them to scale? So, well, first of all, before I get to that, why does it matter? So just like burnout at scale is very detrimental and costs companies money and outcome and has negative results. The opposite of that, if you can boost and infuse and increase and invest in having a thriving workplace culture, it leads to tangible business results. So hence, that's the business why to invest in this at work. So here's the wanting to leave you with some super practical, easy to implement things that you can do. And again, just as you want to make these happy habits habit for yourself, to do them consistently, small things consistently goes a long way. The same thing at work. If you can intentionally bring mindfulness, gratitude, and investing in experiences and relationships in small ways at work, that is how you're going to start to infuse the culture with those things that enable it to be a thriving workplace culture. I'm just going to give you 9 ideas. Choose one and start practicing at work right away. So in the mindfulness category, these are things that I actually use with clients and sort of like the favorite ideas that lead to the best outcomes. So the first one is to just remember to always be present with others. Really take time in your one-on-ones to check in with how someone is feeling. Listen to their answer. I think a lot of times we tend to jump into the agenda for our one-on-ones. And again, we're not building relationships and we're not being present, right? Set the tone and just make that a habit. The second one is same thing, but in team meetings, right? Pause just to reinforce the purpose again, being present and mindful. Why are we in this meeting really? How does this connect with the bigger purpose, meaning, and vision for the organization? People want to be connected to higher purpose and meaning. Give that moment at the top of the meeting to set the tone rather than just immediately jumping in. Just allow people to kind of like be present, and I guarantee you'll have a different meeting. And then this was one of my favorite tips from actually the CEO of Cousin Subs, Christine Specht, said one of the best things that she did as a leader that has ripple effects on her team is to schedule reflection time. So she actually personally sets aside time, or she intentionally puts her laptop down and just sits back and reflects, right? Just sort of allows innovation and creativity, really strategic planning to come, because she's able to just get out of the weeds and see the bigger picture. And then she extended that to the members of her team and said, it's okay, schedule time, schedule that think time, schedule that reflection time, schedule that time to just sort of sit and reflect on your day and don't feel guilty. All right, so those are just 3 thought starters for ideas. Maybe it sparks other thoughts of tangible, small things that you can do right away. So similarly, what are 3 ideas in the category of how do you infuse more of an attitude of gratitude at work so that collectively you're investing in resilience as a leadership competency? Simple one, just say thank you more often. I think a lot of times when people rise to the occasion, especially in high performing cultures, we just expect them to. Oh yeah, that's their job. That's what they're getting paid for. Maybe doesn't help to tack on a little thank you as well. Again, people sort of feel recognized and appreciated. Also acknowledge the effort. A lot of times we tend to acknowledge the outcome of that effort, but it took effort to create the outcome. That shouldn't get overlooked. A simple way of infusing an attitude of gratitude and that sense of appreciation is to always make time to recognize the small little things that may go unnoticed that add up to the bigger win. And then also on your one-on-ones, let people know what they uniquely do well and what they uniquely contribute. I don't think employees hear that enough. Again, hey, am I just a cog in the wheel? I'm working super hard. Does anyone notice? Let people know what they uniquely bring to the table. Again, that will make you feel good, but it also make the recipient feel good, help to spread that positivity. So then the last category of quick hit ideas, and we'll get to sort of questions and comments, investing in experiences and relationships. So just to make sure that you're getting to know people personally, I think that, be proactive in terms of maybe scheduling coffee chats in person or virtual with people. That would be one idea, like build that into your workday without feeling guilty. Ask better questions. A lot of times, when we see people like, hey, what's up? How you doing? Oh, good. Moving on. Well, maybe repurpose those 10 seconds to something a little bit more meaningful. I always say, ask better questions, you get better answers. Try some creative questions instead of, saying, hey, how are you? Maybe one day the question you're going to be is, hey, what are you learning that's new? Or what are you excited about? I think people will be kind of like pleasantly surprised, like, oh, you're kind of interested in me. Well, let me tell you. And then you'll learn. And then next thing you know it, you just know the person on a deeper level, and that leads to more joy and meaning. And then maybe your teams are getting back together again in person, maybe not. But, happy hours is a good go-to, but let's get a little bit more creative. A thriving culture means people feel that they're learning and growing. So learn something new together as a team. Maybe take an online course together. During the true lockdown with my teams, I was doing a lot of Airbnb online experiences. You can go to their Airbnb website and, I'd find someone. We did like cooking in Italy. We did a ramen noodle tasting from someone in Japan. So people living in different parts of the world with a passion or interest, you schedule time with them, you get a little private tutorial for your group. We're learning together. And it really helps to, again, invest in that important happy habit. Okay. Well, I wanted to make sure that we had time for questions and comments. And so let me pause there and see what you guys think. What questions might you have? What comments might you have? I don't know if you're able to get yourself off mute and ask, but if not, go ahead and put them in the chat, and happy to entertain any questions or comments. And I think, Sharon, you were raising your hand, so I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to post in the chat. Well, while waiting for any questions or comments, my question to you is, and I'm going to go back to the slide. Oopsie. My question for all of you to put in the chat is, choose one thing, right? Please put in the chat. What is one thing, either one of the ideas on my slide, or if it inspired ideas of your own, what is one thing that you can put into practice today that is one step closer to investing in a thriving workplace culture as a leader? Curious to know. Oh, a couple people like the ask better questions. I do like that one. Acknowledge effort, reinforce purpose. Yes. Well, I will tell you, I like all the ideas. And frankly, I only put ideas that clients actually do and come back and say they can tell a difference. But the one, and I see a question coming, I'll get to that 1 second. The 111 where people consistently come back is the pause to reinforce purpose at the top of the meeting. And people say immediately they can tell that the tone of the meeting, the engagement of the meeting is more positive and higher because they just take a moment, even if it's a recurring meeting, it's like, we all know why we're here. It doesn't, there's no damage done to reinforce why this meeting is important to the bigger cause mission of whatever you're doing. And people really like that. And this is a great way to start out positive. So some questions. Curious about the research, what influences positivity, external events, internal thinking, and DNA? Where does that data come from? Yeah, so that's a really good question. So there's a study that was done, and frankly, I cannot remember the name of the study, but I will email it to Zach so he can send it out later. And I'll actually send you to the website that elaborates a lot more on the study and does the breakdown. So anyways, I can't remember the name of the study, but it's at least, I want to say it's maybe like a decade old by now, but it's pretty famous. So I'll send that to Zach so Zach can email it out to everybody, I guess, along with the slides too. So a comment, I love pausing to reinforce purpose. Too often it feels like we're in an endless blur of meetings. Yes. Creating division in the purpose of each meeting is a great idea. Yeah. I think, none of this is rocket science, which is a good thing. The challenge is we just get in our execution mode. And the hardest part is just setting new habits. And that's why I was like, try one thing that's small. None of these things require more time, by the way. They're all just, how do you show up and use your time better? And just try one thing until it becomes so ingrained and habitual that you don't even notice it, but you're doing something and showing up as a more positive leader, and then go on to the next thing. So, well, with that, I guess I will say thank you very much for showing up and listening and engaging. Here is my contact information where you can find me if you have more questions or you want more information. And yeah.